Shalom Aleichem, everybody. It's Lamed Aleph Amud Beis today by the Mishnah. I'm just going to raise my stender to see if I can get my Gemara closer. Hey, you get behind the scenes view over here. What's going on? Geschmack to do that. Geschmack to do. Okay. Zogt the Heilige Mishnah. Shevuos ha'edos ketzad. Yeah? What is the example, the classic example of Shevuos ha'edos? What does it look like? Omar l'shnayim boyu va'iduni. Guy says, the plaintiff, the Teveya, says to two Eidim, please, doesn't say please over here, but he says, boyu, come, va'iduni, and give Eidus on my behalf. And they respond, Shavua she'ein onu yoyden l'chaydus. We swear we don't know Eidus. Aisha Amru, they said, ein onu yoyden l'chaydus. They didn't say Shavua. They said, we don't know. Ein onu yoyden l'chaydus. And he responded, Mashbi'ani aleichem, va'amru amen. Swear, and they said amen. Then arei elu chayavim. These are two examples. First one is mushba mepi atzmai. They voluntarily offer a shavua saying ein onu yoyden l'chaydus. The second case, where he says mashbi'ani aleichem, is called mushba pi acherim. And when they answer amen, that is a din of mushba pi atzmai, like we'll see in the Gemara. Okay, now, where does the shavua have to take place? What happens if this interaction happened outside of Bezdin? Ubol Bezdin, and then these two guys ran to Bezdin, and they were moida that they know the Eidos, Peturin. So even though they were koifer on the Shavua outside of Bezdin, they're pater once they come to Bezdin. Why? So Rashi says, like the Gemara is going to say, she'ein kfira chutz laBezdin. It doesn't work outside of Bezdin. Okay. But kafru chayav al kol achas v'achas. But if they were kafir in Bezdin, meaning the shavua happened outside of Bezdin, and the kfira, right? He says mashbi'ani aleichem outside of Bezdin, and the kfira happens in Bezdin. So chayav al kol achas v'achas, for every kfira in Bezdin on the shavua, the mashbi'ani aleichem outside of Bezdin, right? It's half and half. Then they're chayav on each one. Gemara is going to explain where we learned it out from. Okay, we'll get there. Finally, hishbiya alein chamish pa'amim bifnei Bezdin. What if the entire exchange between the Teveya and the Eidim happened in front of Bezdin? The kafru and the kfira happens also in Bezdin, then einen chayovin ela achas. Then chayav only on one kfira. Why is that? So Rashi says, because once they're koifer once in Bezdin, then that registers as an agadas edus, and we have a klal of kim shega tshuva nechazer magid. They can't testify again, and now they're not roy laheid anymore. Second kfira is not roy laheid because they already gave testimony with the first kfira, and therefore Shevuos edus only applies when you're roy laheid. And Reb Shimon, that's Reb Shimon says, Matam hoil ve'enim choyim lachzer lahoidus. Okay, I jumped the gun. Rashi explains Reb Shimon that hoil ve'enim choyim lachzer lahoidus. That's why it doesn't help. The second kfira, the third kfira, the fourth, the fifth, they're not responsible for. Kafur shnein ke'echad. What happens if they're kafir both together at the same time, simultaneously? The Gemara is going to get involved. Efshalat samsim i, efshalat samsim techkei dibur. We'll get there. Shneim chayavin. Then they're both chayiv a carbon Shevuos ha'edos, because that's the classic example of Shevuos ha'edos, when somebody summons you to Bezdin to testify on their behalf and you deny it. B'zeh charzeh. What if one guy, one of the Eidim, denies first, and then the second guy denies it, the second Eid? Harishon chayiv hasheni pater. Why? Because once the first guy denies it, now you're left with one Eid. And we know that Eid Echad is not Roy Lahayid. So then here have a din of Ein Roy Lahayid, then Shevuos ha'edos only applies for Ru'uy and Lahayid. Kafir Echad Lahayd Echad. What if one guy denied it and the second guy admitted that he knows the testimony and he's willing to come? then a kofer chayiv, only the kofer is chayiv. The Gemara is already going to explain what the chiddush over here is. Avada. I mean, hoide echad. Second guy's potter, he's moida. Only one guy's chayiv. Gemara is going to talk about the backstory in this example. What if you had two separate groups of Edom? If the first group denied, and afterwards the second group denied, then they're both chayiv. Because the edus could be sustained with each group on their own. So even though the Rishono was kaifer, the Shni is still responsible to come give edus because their testimony would be effective. So since the second testimony would be effective, testimony of the second group, then they're also chayiv if they deny it. So now we come to the halacha of Shmuel. If the Edom see that the Toveya is running after them, he's like, "Hey guys, hold up!" Amru lo, so they turn around and they say to him, they immediately realize what's going on. They know what he wants, okay? They say, "Why are you running after us? Shevuos, we swear we don't have testimony, leave us alone." Now, the Tevei never asked, right? Never asked Mafurish that they should come give testimony on his behalf. They just saw him running and they assumed this is what he wants. And they right away jumped the gun and made a Shevuah. Then that's Pturin, Achi Yishma'u Mipiv. Here's a Chiddush. And we'll talk about it more in the next daf, that you have to hear it, Mepia Teveya. That if they jumped the gun before the Teveya verbally expressed interest in having them come testify on his behalf, then they are pater, even though they swore. My kamashma, that's the Gemara. What's the chidush? Tanina, we learned this mission Amid Hey Aleph. If the Teveya sends his slave, or the defendant says, if you know edus on behalf of my Teveya, the other guy, come give the edus. Right? You know why they're pater? Because in both cases, when the Teveya sends the Eved, or the Nitba is mashbi on behalf of the Teveya, the Edom are not hearing it from the Teveya himself. And the halacha is, Achi Yishma'u Mepia Teveya Atzmai. So the Edom are pturim. Achi Yishma'u Mepia Teveya. So the shaila is, why is Shmuel telling me this chiddush? He's just echoing a Mishnah. Tanoim! My kamashmalan. Says the Gemara, Rotza Achrei and Etztruchalei. No, Shmuel has an additional chiddush over here. Because over here, you see that Teveya is, maybe he's not doing it verbally, but you could see his body language, right? And you read body language. What did they say? Like 70% of communication is body language, only 30% is verbal. So the Chiddush in Shmuel is, what do you mean? You know, the majority percentage of a person's communication happens in his bodily expressions. So here is Rotzach Reyan, so maybe that's considered enough of a request from the Teveya to be Mechayiv the Mishvos Eidus. That's not enough. No, it has to be articulated verbally. Mar says, okay, Vanami Tanina. We also have a Mishnah for that. Shevuos Eidus Ketzad. What does Shevuos Eidus look like? Omer Leidem Boyu Va'iduni. Right? This is our Mishnah we just learned. It says, what does Shevuos Eidus, the Chiyuv, look like? It's when the Teveya says, Omer Leidem Boyu and they respond, Shavuos she'en l'chayda. So you see from here, Amar en lo yomer loy. It's only if he says it. So I need Shmuel to tell me that Achi Yishim Piyat Avei Atzma, if it's Mefurish in the Lashon HaMishnah. Gemara says, no, Lashon HaMishnah is Amar Lav Davkin. You wouldn't know this with Lashon HaMishnah. Amar, that's usually what happens. Shmuel is B'machadish, even if a taka doesn't happen. Or even if it's Ratzach Rei and it doesn't help. Because if you wouldn't say Amar's Lav Davka, Gabe Pikodin, Diktani Shevuos HaPikodin Ketzad, by Pikodin, when we say Lamed Vavam at Beis the Mishnah over there, that what does Shevuos HaPikodin look like? Amar Loi, the Mafkid tells the Nifkad, Ten li Pikodin shesh li biyotcha. Give me back my Pikodin. Yochanami, Omar in Loi Mar Loi, over there the Lashon HaMishnah is Omar, right? The Mafkid said, he was Teveya, verbally saying, give it back to me. So you would say, Bimadak in the Mishnah over there too, Amar en Lo Amar Loi, HaKichish Bamisoi, Koldu. Shteitach in the Torah, as long as he denies even a Koldu, it doesn't have to be by Peshvuos HaPekadon. We don't need the Mafkid to ask verbally for the Pekadon back. As long as the Nifkad denies it, right, and he lies, then he's Chayiv and Shvuos HaPekadon. So the Gemara says, so Elo Amar Lav Davka. So in that Mishnah, by Shvuos HaPekadon, when it says Amar is Lav Davka, because you don't need an Amira. So achanami lav dafka. So here it's also lav dafka. So Mamela, it's not so mafurish in the Mishnah. I need Shmuel to reinforce that with his chiddush, because in the Mishnah is Omar, it's not dafka. So maybe I would have said Ratzach Rein does help. Comes Shmuel and says no, Ratzach Rein doesn't help. Yitaka need an amira. I should say this. So Gemara asks like this: Hi, ma yom b'shleima Omar dahacha dafka. If you'll say that our Mishnah, when it says Omar, it's dafka, so understand why Tana hasam atu hacha. That's why it says over there Omar, because over here here it's dafka. So if you're going to tell me that both amiras by the Mishnah Shevuos Eidus and later the Mishnah Shevuos Pikadon is lav dafka, so Gemara asks, Omar lo b'dil misneh. So why are you mentioning Omar in both Mishnayos? Says the Gemara, no, dil orcha de milsa kamash malon. It could be that this is orcha de milsa. It says Shevuos Eidus keitzad. You know how it usually unfolds? This is how it usually unfolds. It usually unfolds when the Teveya asks Omar. That's usually the case. So it's not such a kasha why it would say Omar in both Mishnayos, even though you don't need it. Gemara says, Tanya Kavasei the Shmuel, comes Shmuel and says, no, but Shevuos Eidus, it's dafka because you need an amira and even Rotz doesn't help. And Tanya Kavasei the Shmuel, there's a brisa backing up Shmuel, Re'u Shabach Reyan, Edom see the Teveya is coming after them. Amru loy, they say to Matabach Reyan, Shevuos She'en L'ch Eidus, and they jump the gun, they make a Shvuah, P'turim, because they didn't hear the amira. But Pekadim is Chayavim, because there it's a Kichash Ba'amisa, you don't need the Mafkid to verbally summon them for a Shvuah. Okay. Now we have the second case in the Mishnah, Shbiel and Chamisha Pa'amim. Right? 5 times where the Teveya Chutz LeBezdin says, Mashbi'ani Aleichem, swear to me. Right? And they come to Bezdin, then they're Pater. But if they're Koifer and Bezdin, then they're Chai for each one. So the Gemara asks, Menolan the Akfira bebezdin with the Mechayvi, Achutz LeBezdin le Mechayvi. The Mishnah is a Chiddush. If the Kfira happens outside of Bezdin, they're not Mechuyev. But in Bezdin, they're Mechuyev. How do you know this halacha that has to be in Bezdin? Omar Abaya, Omar Kra. Steht in the Teira. Im lo yagid v'nosa avoinoi lo yamarti l'chalu mokim she'ilu magid zeh mischayev zeh moment. It's only when the Haggadah's Eidus is effective to the point of v'nosa avoinoi that it's consequential. It's mechayev the other guy moment. And that can only happen in Bezdin. So you see that the kfira must happen in Bezdin. That's how you learn from the pasuk. How do you know to separate that only the kfira has to be in Bezdin? How do you know that the shvuah could be outside of Bezdin as long as the kfira is in Bezdin? Maybe the shvuah also has to be in Bezdin. No. How do I know? The Tanya learned Abraisa. La'achas steht in the Torah v'hoichi yesham la'achas me'elam. La'achas midarshan l'chayiv al kol achas v'achas. You chayiv on each shvuah separately. And if you're going to tell me that the only time Shevuos Eidus is chal is if the Shevuah itself is also in Bezdin, asks the Gemara, then you won't have a case where this drasha would be applicable. Right? Because in a case where the Shevuah is in Bezdin also, on that we learned, that's only one. Right? Rav Shema says the reason is because the first kfira registers in Bezdin as Agadah say this, and then the other kfiras don't help anymore. So how would you ever have a case of chamisha kfiras and you chayvan kol achas v'achas like we learned from the pasuk of la'achas? So the only way you can resolve that is if you split the shvuah outside of Bezdin, the kfiras in Bezdin, then you could say the chayvan kol achas v'achas. That's what the drasha is teaching me. Okay, I love Shmamina Shvuchas Lebezin, Kfira Bebezin. That the case is Shvuchas Lebezin and Kfira Bebezin. All you need is a Kfira Bebezin. So, just to summarize and clarify, from the Mishnah comes out that there are 3 cases, right? One case is when they make the Shvuah and the Kfira outside of Bezin, then they're potter completely because it has to be B'fnei Bezin. Then you have the middle case, the Shvuah is outside of Bezdin, the Kfir is in Bezdin, then the Chayiv al Kolachas v'Achas. Then if the Shvuah and the Kfir are in Bezdin, then the only Chayiv 1, because of Reb Shimon's Matam, Hoil v'Ini Yochel Lachzer Aloidus. Okay, next, the Mishnah is Kafresh Neim Ka'achas Chayovin, that if simultaneously both Eidim deny or refuse to give testimony with a Shvuah, then they're both Chayiv. More asks, so if Shalat Samtzim, right, how can you measure to have an exact timing of this kfira, of this refusal? Can't be mitzamtzim for it to happen at the same second, the same split second. No, there's a sheet of one of the Heilige Tanoim, Rabbi Yoel Gold, that says F Shalat Tzamtzim. Rabbi Yochanan Omer Afilu Tem Rabbanan. Even according to Rabbanan, Tziyah Shel Tzamtzim, Kigoyin, Shekofru Shneyen, Betoich Kedei Dibur. Betoich Kedei Dibur, Kedibur Domi. Yeah? As long as the second guy's kfira, second eight's kfira happens within Toich Kedei Dibur of the first guy's kfira, that's called Ka'achas. One second, slow down. Mirdi Toich Kedei Dibur Kamahava. How long is Toich Kedei Dibur Kama She'ela Kedei She'ela Stam L'Rav? Right, say Shalom Alecho Rebbe Amoy. 4 words. The Gemara says, Ade Amri Shevuos She'ein Anu Yoiden L'cha Eidos Shevuos She'ein Anu Yoiden L'cha Eidos Tuvahavi. That's more than Toich Kedei Dibur. So how could you tell me that the refusal or the denial of the second eight happened within Toich Kedei Dibur, the first guy? Right, he can't complete the Shavua unless he exceeds the amount of Toich Kedei Dibur. So it can't happen within Toich Kedei Dibur. No, kol echad ve'echad Toich Diburei shel chaverim. In other words, as long as he begins the Shavua she'en l'chid is within Toich Kedei Dibur of the denial or refusal of his friend, that's enough. In other words, you need the beginning. That's all. As long as you begin, that's called Toich Kedei Dibur and it registers ka'achas. That's called ka'achas. Which reminds me, there is a Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara in Brachas says that there is one rega, ki rega ba'apo yichayim b'rtzon. There's one rega where Kadosh Baruch Hu has anger every day, and Bilam Arasha knew that rega, and he was trying to be mechaven his klala when he cursed Am Yisrael in that rega, so for it to have power and take effect. And Tosfos says, what could you say in one rega? What kind of klala could you give in a rega? It's just a rega, it's a split second. So one answer in Tosfos and Brachas, Tosfos gives two to it. And one answer in Brachas is, you could say the word kalim, right? Just completely, I guess you can pronounce it, kill him. Kill him out. Kalim, right? And the other teretz is that as long as he begins the klala in that rega of anger, then that has power. That power carries over into the klala, even if it's beyond the timing of that rega, which the Aruch HaShulchan brings a very interesting halacha based on that Tosfos. He says, let's say somebody's, he wakes up late one morning and he realizes, oh my gosh, it's almost Seivzman Tefillah, Seivzman Kriya Shema, and there's like 1 second left or 1 minute left, right? And he starts learning Kriya Shema, but he ends his Kriya Shema after the Zman. So Aruch HaShulchan brings a right from that Tosfos, right? In Brachas, that you see from Tosfos that if Bilam began his klal of the rega, then that carries over as long as you start on time. So Aruch HaShulchan says also, if you start on time with your Shemoneh Esrei, your Kriya Shema, even if as you're saying it, time ends, you're beyond the time, you're still okay. From our Gemara, you see a similar concept. You see the concept of Toich Kedei Dibur. As long as he begins the Shevuos she'en l'cha eidos, that's still considered Toich Kedei Dibur of Chaverei.
Daf Zayin.
Tois Daf Zayin. Yeah, Gemara Daf Zayin. Where do you? What's the Zichur Simon for that?
Kli Zayin. It's a gun. It's pointing at the. That's also the Gemara of Russia, B'Tovleit.
Tzaddik B'Rala, Russia B'Tovleit, yeah.
And it's the same Gemara. So you see
pointing
the gun at the Tzaddik. It's
right.
Bilam pointing the gun at the exact
This is Rocky speaking, right? It's so cool to have somebody record the shiur
I go back
who like knows Shas, like it's like.
I wouldn't go that far.
Anyway, very good. It's beautiful. Okay, Zukt the Gemara Vater. The Mishnah said, "B'zechar zeh harishin chai v'asheni poter." The case of b'zechar zeh, the first guy denies, refuses first, makes a shvuah, and then the second guy. So the second guy is poter. Why is the second guy poter? We explained because second guy is not roy lahed anymore. He's one aid. Eidach is not roy lahed, and shvuah aid is only when your aidus would really have an effect, right? You can collect money with it. Gemara asks, "Masnis loikai tana." This Mishnah cannot fit with the following tana. Tanya, mishbiya dechod poter b'los v'shem mechayev. Somebody who was mashbiya, one aid, and he asks him to testify on his behalf. So machlekes tanoim whether he's poter or chayev. B'los v'shem is mechayev. Lema b'alka miflagi. The Mar saver aid dechod ki asa l'shvuah deka asa. Right, the one who says he's poter is because anyways he can't be mechayev mammon. Only a shvuah eidach is only effective for a shvuah, not to collect the mammon. And Shevuos Eid is only when there's a loss of money. Without you, I can't collect money. If you would have come, I would have been able to get my money. So if he's only effective for a Shevuah, then denying that, refusing that, that's not the crime of Shevuos Eid. There's a million potter. Omar Savar and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon holds Eid Echad Ki Asa. And this happened to the Gemara. The Gemara believes, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Eid echad is effective to collect money, and the Yesoid HaMachlokas is, and how to darshan the pasuk of Lo Yokam Eid Echad Be'ish L'chol Oven L'chol Chatas. How do you darshan that pasuk? The Miyat Akro, when the Torah says Eid Echad is not effective, L'chol Oven L'chol Chatas, what is L'chol Oven L'chol Chatas referring to? Is it referring to Malchus and other Einshim? Or is it referring to also Mammon? Rabbi Hashem says it's L'chol Oven L'chol Chatas, not referring to Mammon. Eid Echad is effective for Mammon. It could be useful to bring an Eid Echad to be tevei somebody else's moment. So in our Mishnah says that if the Rishon is kaifer, the Sheni is potter, why would the Sheni be potter according to Rabbi Shimon? He still could have used the Sheni to collect his money. Eid Echad is effective. Must be our Tana in the Mishnah is not like a Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, no, not so fast. V'tizbara. Really, you really think that Rabbi Shimon holds that Eid Echad can be mechayev mammon? Omer Abaye, hakoil moedim. We're going to say a statement of Abaye. I'm going to ask you to hold on. We're going to elaborate. We're going to explain the statement a little bit later, but just for one line of the statement that's relevant to us, and then we're going to unpack it in a few minutes. Omer Abaye said the following: Hakol moedim be'eid soita, v'hakol moedim be'eid soita, u'machloikis be'eid soita. Hakol moedim be'eid echad, right? V'hakol moedim be'eid shekeneg d'chashel ha'shvua. But what do you see from here? Hakol moedim be'eid echad, that the eid echad is ineffective usually, and it's only in one case where you're mechayev him. But you see, hakol moedim usually in eid echad is not. So the Gemara says, okay, from that line in Abaye's statement, the rest of the statement we'll unpack in a few minutes, but from that line itself, you see that there's no machloikas between Rabbi Loz, Rabbi Shimon, and the Rabbanan, whether an eid echad can be mechayev moment. Everybody agrees, usually you can't. Everybody agrees that eid echad is only effective to be mechayev shvua. And here the machloikas is something else. Mar savar davar agoyrem lamaman kamaman dami, mar savar lav kamaman dami. The shaila is whether the chiyuv shvua, that an eid echad can be mechayev, that's a goyram lamaman. Because a lot of people don't want to swear. They don't want to give a shvua. And even if they're right, they don't want to get involved in Shevuos. You know, the Gemara Metzia says, Nizdaza oilam b'lo sisa. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu said lo sisa, the oilam, the world, shook to its core. And that's why the Gemara there says, people would much quicker do other Averas than do the Avera of swearing falsely. It's not just swearing falsely. Even if he's right, he's not going to want to swear. And Mamela, what's he going to do? He's going to want to pay. Right? So the Eid Echad, even though he can't directly impose a Chiyav Mammon, but indirectly, through his Chiyav Shvua, he can force a person to do the alternative and pay. So that's the Davar HaGoyrim L'Mammon. And the question is that Kamaman Dami or not? And that's the Machlekes B'Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. Whether, if an Eid Echad refuses to come to Bezdin on my behalf and be mechayev somebody a shvua, is that called kamaman dami, as if he caused me a loss, a monetary loss, and it's in the parasha of Shvuas Eidos.
The Gemara in Shabbos says Adam Bahol al Mamoinai.
Adam Bahol al Mamoinai.
It says by saving svarim on Shabbos.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, that you could save it because otherwise you could do it the Rabbanon, otherwise you're going to be over this is the rights of extinguishing a fire.
Yes.
That seems to be a steer to this. This is saying nobody would swear. They were saying God would risk his life.
Wow. Right? Wow. So he's saying over there...
His money should be more important than his words.
Over there, you're saying the Gemara says that Adam Bala Mamayne is come to Chilul Shabbos. He's come to Chilul Shabbos.
Isser Deraisa being
for money.
Extinguishing a fire on Shabbos. Right. For his money.
So between Isser Deraisa of Bimchal Shabbos versus saving his money,
we say
person,
money.
Yeah.
Between Shvuah and money, we say Shvuah.
Right. It's a great question. Right, it's a great question.
Maybe there's something about a Shevuah that people even take more seriously than...
Right, maybe something about a Shevuah, like you're saying.
Even more than being Mechal Shabbos, which you would think...
More than Chilul Shabbos, Daza Olam. And also there's a key word over there, Adam Bahol. There's a Bahala. It's like a Bahala, like a person... where do we find this also in...
Where's the other Bahol?
In Sanhedrin, in Baba Machteres.
Oh.
Yeah, another example of... Yeah, you're allowed to kill the other person.
That's right.
Why are you allowed to kill the other person? Because otherwise you're going to stand your ground and you're going to end up being killed.
Right.
So it's like also another example of what you're saying, where your own life you would risk even being killed for your money.
Right. Yes. Good point.
Yeah. So in other words, there you need something about Shevuos. Right.
Yeah. Must be that much the people.
Right. Oh. Yeah. Between Rocky and I, we got Shabbos, we got Sanhedrin, we got so many Masechtas over here. Yeah.
But what comes out on top? Shevuos. Oh.
What comes out on top? Shevuos. Gewaldig. Oh.
Carefully you have to be with your words, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Okay, now, as promised, we're going to unpack Abaye's complete statement. Okay, Gufa. Omer Abaye. Hakoil moidim be'eid soita. V'hakoil moidim be'eid soita. Machlokes be'eid soita. Hakoil moidim be'edacha, v'hakoil moidim be'echad shnei d'chashal l'shvur. Now let's unpack one by one. Hakoil moidim be'eid soita. Shechayev. There's an example by an aid soita, where the husband asks an aid, please come testify on my behalf, where if he doesn't, and he swears that he doesn't know testimony, and obviously he's found to be a liar, made a mistake, whatever, then he's chayav and shvus eidus, even though it's an eid echad. What's the case? Be'eid toma, which means there are already eidim that the husband warned his wife not to be miyachad, eidei kinoi. There are already eidim that she was miyachad with that guy her husband warned her against, eidei stira, which are the steps to leading to Mayim Ma'arim, to Mesoita, where she has to go to the Kohen, she has to drink the waters test her, right? If she's innocent, it's bracha. If she's not, her stomach explodes. But the Torah says that in between Eid Kinei Stira and the Kohen, if one aid shows up and says, I know she was Matama. Besides the Eid Kinei Stira, I know Bebriris, I know that she was Matama with this guy. The halacha is the Rachmana Hemnei. The Torah believes him, and now she doesn't progress to the next step of Mesoita. She doesn't even drink Mesoita, right? She immediately loses credibility, and there's a divorce, and the husband does not have to pay the ksuba. Why? It says as long as you have one aid, that's enough. So what do you see? You see that in this example, this specific case, this aid, an aid echad, has the power to save the husband money, the ksuba, right? Because he's believed to say that she's nitma. So in this case, akol moedim be'eid soita, that if he denies, refuses the husband that testimony that could save him, the ksuba, then he's chayiv and shvus eidus. Second line in Abaya. Akol moedim be'eid soita. What's the example of eid soita? Shapater be'eid kinoi. Oh. Right? The first step in a soita is the husband warns his wife not to be misyached with a certain guy. That's called eidei kinoi. They're eidim on that. Right? Now he says, husband says to these eidim, you guys saw me make this hasra, this kinoi, this warning. Can you please testify that I did it? Right? And they refuse to give testimony and back the husband up on the kinoi and say that Taitaka saw the husband make the kinoi. That avada, everybody agrees that they're potter, even if they make a Shevuos. Why? They have a goyrim, the goyrim. Because by them coming and saying we saw the husband warn his wife, it's not guaranteed yet that he's not going to pay the ksuba, right? There are other couple of steps that have to happen. Number 2, you have to have eidei stira. And number 3, she has to drink the mesoita, right? So it's only a goyrim, the goyrim is for sure l'kul am alav kamam adami, right? The machlokes is in the middle step, eidei stira. Be'edei soita, be'edei stira. Right? So in other words, you have the eidei kinoi. That Adam saying, we for sure saw the husband warn his wife not to be miyachid. Then, the Adam that saw the stira refused to give testimony. So here, their testimony can be goyrim lamamen. Right? Because if they would give that testimony, she'll have to drink the mayim amarim, the mesoita, and then she could master the ksuba. There's a chance for it to be master the ksuba. So that would be only a goyrim marsava dor goyrim lamam kamamadami v'chayev marsava love kamamadami yipot. That's only one step removed. That's a goyrim. The question is a goyrim lamam kamamadami or not. And that's machlokes between Reb Elazar, Reb Shimon, and Tanakama. Now, the next line in Abaye's statement: Hakol moedim b'shekenegdoi chashad ala shavua. Everybody agrees b'shekenegdoi chashad ala shavua that he's chayev if he denies to give testimony. And Hakol moedim eidechad rababa. So let's unpack these two. Hakol moedim b'shekenegdoi chashad ala shavua. What's that mean? It means that, let's say, Ruvain asks Shimon to pay him back, right? And Shimon denies it. I don't know your money. So So Reuven goes to Levi. Levi says, "Can you give testimony?" So Levi says, it's not going to be effective. I can only be mechayev Meshua. He says, "Yeah, but I have a plan." See, Shimon is an own ganav. He's a gazlan, and he wouldn't be able to make a shvuah because he's not neman. He's choshed. So what's going to happen in court? They're going to impose the shvuah on me. When the defendant can't swear because he's choshed, then the shvuah is rolled onto the plaintiff. And now the plaintiff, the teveya, Reuven has to swear that Shimon Taka owes him the money, and it's Shvuas HaNotel and he takes the money. So the aide says, no, I don't want to get involved. But slow down. If he doesn't get involved, his aid, his testimony will lead to what? To a tashlumen. Because the guy who's going to have to swear as a result of his testimony is chashed, he won't be able to swear. And then the shvuah is going to be on the teveya, and he's going to swear and take. So if he doesn't give testimony, his refusal is causing a loss to the teveya in such a case. So here everybody agrees that he's chayiv. The eid echad, if he denies and refuses the testimony, then he's chayiv shvuas eidus. Says the Gemara. Gemara says, slow down. If you're going to tell me the loiv is the one that's chashed, because the malva says, because if you would come and give testimony and be mechayiv, the loiv can't swear because he's chashed, then I would swear and take it. And now without you, I can't take my money. So you caused me a loss. But the aid can counter back and say to the malva, one second, slow down. Who says you would have sworn? You can't just take the money just because he's a chashid. You would have to swear that he owes me the money. But who says you would swear, right? We talk about leisisa, right? And olam nizdaza, shavua, how chomer it is. And even if you're right, maybe you would opt out and say, I'd rather lose the money. I don't want to swear. So it's not so guaranteed. It could be it's just a goyim l'mammon and it's subject to the machlekes of Rabbi Shimon and Tanakama. Ella, so Gemara says, no. The case of Abaye, when Abaye said, Hakoil moedim, that's kegoyin sheshneyan chashudin. They're both suspicious. None of them can swear. The Omar, in such a case, chozr shavua lemechuyivla. Then it rolls back to the original guy who's supposed to swear, which is the loiva. And betoich sheni yochel l'shava mishalem. So nobody has to swear in such a case. Nobody's going to have to swear because they're both chashud. And now we'll have to pay. So here you have a case where a testimony from an eid echad could be mechayev tashlumen, and if he doesn't do it, then he's mechuyev shvuas eidus. Okay. So the Gemara right here. The last example of Abaye was Hakoil Moedim Be'eid Echad Derab Abba. What's the case of Echad Derab Abba? The Hu Gavra, the Chot of Naschem Echavrei. A guy grabbed a piece of silver from his friend. Osla Kamei Derabami. So he came running to Rabami. Avi Yosef Rabbi Abba Kamei. Rabbi Abba was sitting in front of Rabami. Osla Isachat Saad, the Michtav Chat Femenai. So the Teveya quickly brought an aide who saw what happened, and he saw him snatch the chatichas keser from him. He says, I have an aid. This guy snatched it. So the snatcher, the nitva says, in chatvi, it's true, I did snatch it, but the chatvi, it's mine. So Rabami said, how should we judge this case? How are we going to litigate this? If we force the snatcher to pay leketrei sahadi, there are no two eidim. If it's lifterei, right, you need two eidim. You can't be moitzim mechaveiroi without two eidim. Can't be mechayiv mom without two eidim. Lifterei, if we're going to pater him, can't pater him completely either. Right? There's an eid echad that saw it. So usually an eid echad is mechayiv shvuah. So the Shtieble, so we're going to force him to swear. Once he admitted that he was chatav, have a like a gazlan, he can't swear just like a gazlan can't swear. Not for the same reason, obviously, for a different reason. Because the shavua, usually the echad is mechayiv, is a shavua to counter the teveya's claim. Right? Usually it's a shavua. Let's say Reuven says Shimon owes me money. Eid echad, he has an eid echad. So the echad is mechayiv Shimon a shavua that I don't owe you money. That's usually the shavua. The shavua is to counter the teveya's claim. But over here, since it says en chatvi, I did steal it. I did grab it from you. So the shavua is going to be an echo of what the teveya already said. That's not a shavua eid echad. That kind of shavua eid echad can't be mechayiv. So you can't pay. Can't force him to pay because no two eidim. Eid echad can't be mechayiv shavua because that's not the shavua. Eid echad is mechayiv usually. Usually eid echad is mechayiv shavua. That counters the teveya's claim. Here, it supports the teveya's claim. So what are you going to do? Amalei Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Abba said in front of Rabbi Ami, he said, "Avalei mechuyev shuv ve'eni yochel l'shava, v'chol ha'mechuyev shuv ve'eni yochel l'shava, mishalem." Goes back to the classic rule of anyone who cannot swear for whatever reason in Bezdin, he's got to pay. So now, this eid echad, right? This eid echad, is mechayiv mammon in such a case. So if he refuses to give testimony, then he mechuyev on Shevuos Eidus. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa adds to the list of Abaya, Kol Moedim, another two examples, Be'ed Misa Shel Chayiv, Kol Moedim Be'ed Misa Shel Potter. There's a case of Eid Misa that an Eid Echad would be Chayiv and Shevuos Eidus, and in case of Eid Misa, Eid Echad would be Potter Shevuos Eidus. Kol Moedim Be'ed Misa Shel Potter. What's the case of Potter? The Amar Lo Lidah, V'lo Amar Lo Bezdin. Right, in a case where the Isha is an Aguna, a woman is an Aguna, she doesn't know where her husband is. There's an Eid Echad who knows, who saw the husband dead. Right? And he tells it to the woman outside of Bezdin, and he refuses to give testimony in Bezdin. So here, the Eid Echad is Potter. You know why? Because the woman herself can come to Bezdin and say, I heard it from this Eid, and she would be believed. So there was no monetary loss, right? She could still collect her ksuba. Ditnan, because we learned the Mishnah Yivam, Isha sha'amra meiz ba'ali tinasa, meiz ba'ali tisyabim. Isha herself is believed, and she would be believed to even quote the Eid Echad she heard outside of Bezdin, and she would be able to collect her ksuba. So the Eid, by refusing to give testimony in Bezdin, didn't cause her a loss. In the case of Eid Misru Chayiv is the Eid refused to tell her outside of Bezdin. So now she has no way of collecting her ksuba, and in this case, so he caused her a loss by not coming, and therefore it'd be Chayiv Shevuos Eidus. Shema Minah, says the Gemara. What do you see from here? Usually ksuba is collected from the karka, from the karkoy sabal. So here, if you see that an Eid Echad who denies testimony to a woman, and thereby prevents her from collecting the ksuba, the karka that's meshubater, so you see Shmamina mashbia Eidei karka chayiv, that even if you deny testimony on real estate, right, for the Teveh to claim real estate, is chayiv Shevuos Eidus. It's not so simple. We'll see about later. So Gemara says, no, you don't have a raya from this. Gemara dum with tfisa matatla. Could be over here. She was holding on to matatlan of the Baal. She wanted to keep it in place of her ksuba. And so we're not dealing with karkois at all, we're dealing with matatlan, and that's why this Eid Echad would be chayiv Shevuos Eidus. So as far as karka is concerned, we don't have a raya from here. Okay. Sokt the Gemara weiter. We learned the Mishnah kafir echad v'hoide echad, right? Kafir echad v'hoide echad. So it's a simple case. Kafir echad, the only guy who's kafir, the first guy is chayiv Shevuos Eidus, the second guy is hoide. So why? Yavad not chayiv. Gemara says hashta. What's the chiddush? Bezeh is that the tvaike kafri. When it's the rishon is kafir and then the sheni is kafir. You're telling me that the sheni is potter. Or the rishon chayiv sheni potter. Kafir echad v'hoide echad. The sheni is moedim. A boy that is potter. Let's see if we go to kafir shneim. The case over here is a very interesting case. That both were kafir. V'chozer echad mehen v'hoide b'tech kadei dibur. And then the second guy, Toich Kadei Dibur of his Kfira was Chayz and it was Maida. V'akamashma Toich Kadei Dibur Kadibur Dami. Oh, it's called Haida, even though he's Kaifer Toich Kadei Dibur, it's okay, it's Toich Kadei Dibur. If you say that the first case of Kafir Shneim Ke'echad, is Rabbi Yossi Aglili is Efshel Tzamtzim. So the Chiddush in the Reish is Efshel Tzamtzim, the Sefer it's Toich Kadei Dibur Kadibur Dami. The Sefer has the Chiddush of Toich Kadei Dibur Kadibur. El Rabbi Yochanan that says, Kafir Shneim Ke'echad. What's the case of Kafir Shneim Ke'echad? Efshel Tzamtzim is a case of Reish Toich Kadei Dibur because he did a Toich Kadei Dibur. So Reish Toich Kadei Dibur, Sefer Toich Kadei Dibur, Tatu Lamali. So the Chiddush of Toich Kadei Dibur and the Reish and the Sefer, same Chiddush. We need two Chiddushim on that. Gemara says, no, there's an additional Chiddush over here. You know why? Ma'aratei ma'ane mili kfira kfira. When do I say Toich Kadei Dibur helps? If they're both aligned under the same banner of kfira, under the same headline. They're both kafir, right? Rishon is kafir, and then Sheni is kafir, Toich Kadei Dibur of the Rishon's kfira. Aval kfira v'aydah, when they're contradictory statements, the first is kfir and the second is aidah, Toich Kadei Dibur, emaloi, would say, Toich Kadei Dibur doesn't help for that. Kamashman, even when they're contradictory, Toich Kadei Dibur Kadibur Dami, even in such a case. Says the Gemara, we'll finish the mission on Amid Gimel, says the Gemara weiter, Hayishtei Kita Edem, Kafra HaRishayna, V'chakach Kafra HaShniya. If you have two Kita Edem, and you have a kfira first from the Rishayna, then the kfira of the Shniya, then they're both chayiv, right? Because each one, their testimony could have been held up in Bezdin, right? They could have collected the money on behalf of the Teveya. So that's a hafsed moment. Because the Rishniya is mechuyev because the Rishayna already denied, so they're the only cat in the world left to collect this money, and by their refusal to give that testimony, they caused a loss. Yellow Rishayna, but the first cat, Amai, Hakay Mishniya, their refusal didn't cause them a loss. They still has a second cat available. It's unbelievable teretz, right? But the chiddush is that b'shas kfira rishayna, the shniya wasn't eligible to give testimony. You know why? Because they were kroivim to the teveya through their wives. And unashesein goisasais, and their wives were goisas lamisa, they were on their deathbeds. And mao the temu reiv goisas and lamisa. I would have said, since b'shas kfira rishayna, the wives of the kat shniya is so close to death that it's considered as if the shniya is available to give testimony b'shas the kfira rishayna, and therefore they didn't cause him a loss. Because of Rav Geis and Lamisa, right? The enemy's going to die. Kamash v'lo, no hashtami le'shachiv. Right now, b'shas kfiras rishayna, the second kat is still related because they're still alive, they're still breathing, and therefore the rishayna is the only kat available to collect that money on behalf of the teveya, and by not giving the testimony, they caused them a loss, and therefore the chayv shvuos edus. Okay, we'll stop over here by the Mishnah, and the Mitzvah Hashem will continue on to the next daf.